Welcome to Mass Academy. In today's class, let us talk about friction and how to calculate friction. For example, here on this floor we have a block. So we will draw the block here. We have a block here and the mass of the block is m. We represent the mass of the block by the letter m, and this block will be experiencing two forces. What are those two forces? One is the force of gravity that is acting vertically downwards. Force of gravity acting vertically downwards. Force of gravity is the weight of the object, right? So we will write this mg. Force of gravity is equal to mg, the weight of the object. And the second force is the normal force. Normal force will be always acting normal to the surface in contact. So the second force is normal force. Normal force we will represent by the letter Fn. So Fn represent the normal force acting on the object. Normal force means the floor will be pushing the block upwards with a force that is called normal force. On a horizontal surface, the normal force will be always equal to the weight of the object, because you can see this block will not be accelerating up and will not be accelerating down, which means the opposite forces will be equal. So normal force will be always equal to the weight of the object on a horizontal surface. If the surface is horizontal, normal force is equal to weight of the object. So we will write this equation. Normal force is equal to weight of the object mg. What is m? M is the mass of the object, and what is g? The gravity, right? The means gravitational field, or the strength of gravitational field on the surface of the earth. The value of g is 9.8. So value of g on the surface of the earth is 9.8 Newton per kilogram. That is the strength of the gravitational field. Now if you are applying a force on this block, you are applying a force on this block to this side. So applied force, okay, the force you are applying on the block. Whenever you apply a force on any object, then there will be another force acting, that will be the frictional force. Frictional force will be acting in the backward direction. So frictional force we will represent like this: force of friction. So force and the subscript represent friction. So first, force of friction depends on two factors. Okay, friction depends on two factors. One is the nature of the surface, means if the surface is smooth, then the friction will be less, and if the surface is a rough surface, there will be greater friction. So first factor the friction depends on is the nature of the surface. Nature of the surface means the smoothness of the surface. If the surface is smooth, less friction. If the surface is rough, greater friction. Second is the mass of the object, or we can say second, it depends on the normal force. Normal force is mg, right? Actually, for a horizontal surface means how heavier is the object. If the object is light, friction will be less. Means if the mass of the object is less, then friction will be less, and if it has a greater mass, there will be more friction acting on the object. So these are the two factors on which the friction acting on an object depends. One is the nature of the surface in contact. Second is the normal force acting on the object. So if I write an equation to calculate friction, the equation will be like this: force of friction that is equal to, because friction depends on two factors. One is the nature of the surface. Nature of the surface we will represent by this Greek letter mu. So this letter, it reads mu. So with this letter we will represent the nature of the surface, and this is called coefficient of friction. Okay, so mu multiplied the normal force. So this is one of the equation to calculate friction. So what is this mu? Mu is called coefficient of friction, that I will write here. Mu is called coefficient of friction. This represent how what is the nature of the surface, means how smooth the surface is. So you can use this equation to calculate friction if you will use this equation to calculate friction if coefficient of friction means the value of coefficient of friction and mass of the object is given in the question. So in the question, if coefficient of friction and mass of the object is given, you will be using this equation to calculate friction, that is force of friction is equal to coefficient of friction multiplied normal force. And on a horizontal surface, what is normal force? Normal force will be always equal to mg, right? So you will be, this is the another form of this equation. So this is our equation number 1 to calculate friction. So mostly you will be using this equation to calculate friction when if the coefficient of friction and mass of the object is given in the question. Then equation number 2, you are applying a force on this block, right? And the block is not moving, or the block is moving at a constant speed. But when you apply a force on the block is not moving, or it is moving but moving at a steady speed, at a constant speed. So in that case, if it is moving at a steady speed, you know that the opposite forces are equal, right? Opposite forces are equal. So if opposite forces are equal, which means the friction is equal and opposite to the applied force, or you can say the friction is equal to applied force when the object is not moving or the object is moving at a constant speed. So in that case, friction is equal to the applied force, the force applied on the object. When will you use this equation? You can use this equation when the object at rest or moving at a constant speed. So friction is equal to applied force when the object is not moving or the object is moving at a constant speed. So in this type of question, one will be how to calculate friction, right? So if the applied force is given, you can calculate friction, because friction is equal to applied force, and applied force is equal to friction, right? Sometimes the question will be to calculate the applied force. So applied force is equal to friction, but friction will not be given in the question. Mostly what will be given? The coefficient of friction will be given and mass of the object will be given. So if the question is to calculate applied force, you will use this equation, okay? Applied force is equal to coefficient of friction multiplied mg, that is the weight of the object, or this is another equation to calculate. This is to calculate the applied force if the object is at rest or moving at a steady speed. And in most of the question will be asked to calculate the coefficient of friction. If the question is to calculate the coefficient of friction, then this equation you can rewrite applied force divided by mg. So this is another form of second equation, that is to calculate coefficient of friction. So to calculate coefficient of friction, you must calculate the frictional force, okay? Frictional force will be equal to applied force, right? If the object is not moving. So in any question, if it is asked to calculate the coefficient of friction, if the question is asked to calculate the coefficient of friction, you must calculate the frictional force first, then divide that by mg. Why? Or what? If the question is to calculate the coefficient of friction, first you need to calculate friction, then divide the value of friction by mg, then you will get the value for coefficient of friction. And like that, if the question is to calculate acceleration, first you need to calculate the net force and divide the value of net force by mass of the object, so you will get acceleration. Okay, so this is our second equation. Then third equation, if the object is accelerating, means you are applying a force and the object is accelerating, the block is accelerating. So how to calculate friction? In that case, friction is equal to applied force minus net force. So when will you use this equation? This equation you can use if when the applied force and acceleration is given in the question. Then our equation, equation number 4, fourth equation, to calculate the net force I will represent by the letter mass multiplied acceleration. So if the question is to calculate net force is equal to what is the meaning of net force? If two forces are acting in the opposite direction, net force is the difference of the two. So we will write applied force minus force of friction, that is equal to net force, right? Net force is the force to the right side minus force to the left side. This upward force and downward force will be always equal and opposite, so they will cancel out each other. So what is remaining? The frictional force and the applied force is remaining. So the net force is applied force minus frictional force. In this question, the question will be asked mostly to calculate acceleration. So how to calculate acceleration? First you calculate net force, then divide the value of net force by mass of the object. So these are the equations. Okay, these are the 4 equations to calculate frictional force, coefficient of friction, and acceleration of the object. Now we will discuss some examples how to calculate, means we will solve some numerical problems. First question, Marwa exerts a 36 Newton horizontal force as she pulls a 52 Newton sled across a cement sidewalk at a constant speed. So here I am just underlining this. It is at a constant speed. Constant speed. If any object is moving at a constant speed, then friction and applied force will be always equal. If the object is moving at a constant speed, opposite forces will be equal, right? Means applied force will be equal to friction. And what is given in the question? Marwa is applying a force that is equal to 36 Newton force, and she pulls a 52 Newton sled. 52 Newton sled means the weight of the sled, that is equal to 52 Newton. The weight of the object I will represent by mg, mass multiplied g, that is weight of the object, that is equal to 52 Newton. So that you need to represent, means you need to understand from the unit of the value given. Here unit is given in Newton, so 52 Newton sled, which means the weight of the sled is 52 Newton. If they give like this 52 kilogram sled, which means mass of the sled is 52 kilogram. So here it is given in Newton, so its weight is 52. Across a cement sidewalk at a constant speed, what is the coefficient of friction? And you are asked to calculate coefficient of friction. And we have already discussed, if the question is to calculate coefficient of friction, the first step is you need to calculate force of friction. That is the only way to calculate coefficient of friction. If the question is to calculate coefficient of friction, first you must calculate the frictional force. So frictional force is equal to, here what is given? The applied force is given, right? One is the applied force is given. Another thing, it is moving at a constant speed. So if the applied force is given and the object is moving at a constant speed, then frictional force is equal to applied force, which means the force of friction, that is equal to 36 Newton. Why? Because applied force is 36 Newton. And you are asked to calculate the coefficient of friction. So we know that if you know the value of friction, coefficient of friction is friction divided by mg. So you can remember this equation. So what is the value of frictional force? 36 Newton. Mass of mg. What is the value of mg? Mg is 52. So 36 divided by 52. 52 is the weight of the object, right? So 36 divided by 52, that is equal to 0.692. So the answer means the value of the coefficient of friction is 0.69. Now we will move to the next question. In the next question, you push a 25 kilogram wooden box across a wooden floor. You push a 25 kilogram, see how it is given, 25 kilogram wooden box, which means the mass of the wooden box is 25 kilogram. That is the mass of the box across a floor at a speed of at a constant speed of 1 meter per second. So this also moving at a constant speed. So if it is moving at a constant speed, which means the applied force will be equal to frictional force, right? That's the meaning of constant speed in this question, in this type of question. The coefficient of friction is given. The coefficient of friction, that is equal to 0.2. And the question is, how large is the force that you exert on the box? So you need to calculate the value of the force that you are exerting on the box, right? Means you want to calculate, or you need to calculate the applied force. So if the object is moving at a constant speed, then applied force will be always equal to frictional force, right? Force of friction. So force of friction will not be given usually in the question, but what will be given? The coefficient of friction will be given. So you need to understand the coefficient of friction, that is not friction, okay? That is one of the component, means one of the term that you can use to calculate friction. So coefficient of friction that you can use in this equation to calculate friction like this. So how to calculate friction? Friction is equal to mu mg, coefficient of friction multiplied mass multiplied g. So value of mu is given, it is 0.2, mass of the object is 25 kilogram, and value of g is 9.8. So when you calculate this one, you will get 49. 0.2 multiplied 25 multiplied 9.8, that is equal to 49 Newton. So the applied force is equal to 49 Newton is the value of the applied force. Then we will move to the next question. Third question, you want to move a 41 kilogram bookcase to a different place in the living room. So the mass of the object, means bookcase, is given, that is 41 kilogram. So you want to move this 41 kilogram bookcase to a different place in living room. If you push with a force of, if you are pushing with a force, means applied force given, that is 65 Newton given in the question. You are pushing with a force of 65 Newton and the bookcase accelerates. So here acceleration is given, okay? In the last two questions it was moving at a constant speed, so acceleration was 0, but in this question acceleration is given, means it's moving at an increasing speed. Acceleration, the value of acceleration is 0.12 meter per second squared. Meter per second squared is the unit of acceleration. And what is the coefficient of friction? You need to calculate coefficient of friction. We already discussed to calculate coefficient of friction. In any question, the question is to calculate coefficient of friction. First, you must calculate the frictional force, right? You must calculate friction. And if the object is accelerating, and the acceleration, the value of acceleration given in the question, then how to calculate friction? Friction is the applied force minus mass multiplied acceleration, the applied force minus net force. So how much is the applied force? Applied force is 65 Newton. So 65 minus the net force, mass multiplied acceleration. Mass is 41, multiplied acceleration is 0.12, that's given in the question. So first we will calculate the friction, then we will, after that we will calculate the coefficient of friction. 65 minus 41 multiplied 0.12, that is equal to 60.08. 60.08 Newton, that is the value of the frictional force acting on the object. So coefficient of friction, once you calculate the frictional force, coefficient of friction is friction divided by mg. So how much is the value of friction? 60.08 divided by mass of the object is 41, multiplied the value of g is 9.8. 60.08 divided by 41 multiplied 9.8, the value is 0.149, so we will write 0.15 is the value of the coefficient of friction. One thing, the coefficient of friction will be always less than 1, it will not be greater than 1. So if you get a value that is greater than 1, which means your calculation is wrong. Another thing, coefficient of friction has no unit, it's a unitless quantity, it's a dimensionless quantity. Why? Because you can see here coefficient of friction, that is force divided by force. What is the unit of frictional force? Newton, right? And what is the unit of mg? The weight, Newton. So Newton and Newton will be cancelled, so coefficient of friction has no unit. Now we will move to the next question, and this is the last question in this video. A 225 kilogram crate is pushed horizontally with a force of 710 Newton. A 225 kilogram crate, which means, see, the unit, okay, the value in which unit the value is given. If the value is given in kilogram, which means the mass of the object, and if the value is given in Newton, that means that will be the weight of the object, or it will be the applied force. So a 225 Newton crate, a 225 kilogram crate, which means mass of the crate is 225 kilogram, is pushed horizontally with a force. Is pushed horizontally with a force means applied force is how much? 710 Newton, right? 710 Newton. If the coefficient of friction is 0.2, here the value of coefficient of friction is given 0.2, no unit, right, for coefficient of friction. Yes, calculate the acceleration of the crate. You need to calculate the acceleration, and I said, or we discussed, if the question is to calculate acceleration, first you must calculate the net force. You must calculate the net force. How to calculate the net force? Net force is the difference of opposite forces, that is the applied force minus the force of friction, means forward force minus backward force. What is the forward force? Means how much force you are applying on the object, that is 710 Newton, right? That is the applied force minus the frictional force. How much is the frictional force? Coefficient of friction multiplied mass of the object, that is 225 multiplied 9.8, right? Where did we get this? We used the equation to calculate friction. We used this mu mg, okay? So we substituted the values of mu, m and g, because mostly frictional force will not be given in the question. You need to calculate friction using this equation to apply in this equation. So when you calculate this, you will get 710 minus 0.2 multiplied 225 multiplied 9.8, which equals 269. So the net force is 269 Newton, and the question is to calculate acceleration. So once you calculate net force, acceleration is net force divided by mass of the object. Net force is 269 and the mass of the object is 225. So 269 divided by 225, 225, 1.19, 1.2 I will write, and the unit of acceleration is meter per second squared. So we have discussed in this video, we have discussed how to calculate frictional force and how to calculate the acceleration of the object or coefficient of friction in 4 different examples. I hope you understand this lesson, you understand how to solve or how to calculate the value of the friction, and I request you to subscribe my channel, and thank you all my friends, all my students for watching this video. Thanks once again.